The dwarves had only been here for a few short years and already had a few casualties. A threat from below could mean disaster if the training of these dwarves was not good enough. But first, let's start where our story begins. Like most games of Dwarf Fortress, our story begins with 7 dwarves, a few animals, and a wagon. As a challenge for this playthrough, my dwarves won't be drinking any alcohol. Dwarves without alcohol is already going to put the citizens of the fortress on edge. A location for the fortress was carefully chosen without any major obvious threats nearby. The dwarves had brought some alcoholic beverages with them in the wagon. I quickly moved those barrels far away from the entrance of our fortress to keep the dwarves from drinking them. I then put the dwarves right to work. They kept busy mining, building workstations, and crafting. To keep them working productively, some dwarves were assigned to the office jobs. Shortly after, we welcomed our first new migrants to our growing fortress. I desperately needed stone. The first mine revealed too much gypsum. Digging deeper, the dwarves found themselves in a cavern, which could hold terrifying creatures we were not yet ready to deal with. I had gotten too greedy too fast. The well-intentioned fisherman dwarf, excited to fish in the newly opened caverns, found herself in a bad situation. She would then become the first casualty of this new civilization. Before long, autumn was here, and traders would be arriving shortly. They had essential items such as more food and seeds to help the dwarves survive the coming years. To prevent any further casualties, the caverns were locked up, and then I finished the negotiations with the visiting dwarf caravan. The fortress grew, migrants arrived, and babies were born. Even after choosing a peaceful location, there are still some annoyances like buzzards to deal with. The amount of dogs in the fortress was starting to become overwhelming as well. The first casualty of the fortress was never properly laid to rest. She was returned to haunt the residents of the fortress. The caverns were reopened to retrieve and bury her body. Things did not go as planned, and the skill level of this group of dwarves proved to not be good enough to recover her body. Winter has come and gone. The dwarves are as productive as should be expected, considering the annoying buzzards, a terrifying ghost, and not having a sip of alcohol for a year. To care for the dwarves, a hospital has been constructed, and a dwarf has been assigned to be the chief medical doctor. Unfortunately, the dwarf chosen happened to be the dwarf unconscious in the bed of the hospital. I figured this out later, and he is taken care of. Some minor accidents have happened. One of the dwarves had a tree collapse on her while chopping it down. She was fine and went back to deforesting the zone shortly after. Alcohol is essential to keeping the dwarves happy. Not having it is making many of these dwarves pretty upset. Having a ghost around is not helping either. I have a solution though. The puppy problem has now become our puppy solution. All the dwarves can have a puppy. Over time, the dogs have become treasured companions for the dwarves, which is why when a kangaroo roamed into the land and attacked one of them, I demanded vengeance. The military squads were sent out to take care of the threat from down under. The dwarven squad leader of the Copper Colors is a dwarf named Bim. Bim has taken to an unusual combat style, where he repeatedly bashes the kangaroo with his crossbow rather than firing it. I was very confused by why he is doing this. After quite a while of smacking the kangaroo around with his crossbow, Bim has emerged victorious and has fallen in love with his melee crossbow. Winter has come again, but there is a problem. No traders have arrived. Upon closer inspection, I find that the previous traders left a bunch of their stuff in the depot. This may be preventing new traders from visiting, so I dismantle the depot, claim the goods, and forbid the booze. The following year was uneventful. The fortress grew, no migrants arrived, and a couple children were born. As autumn was here once again, the traders finally have returned. The food supply was getting low, so this was a welcome sight. After a successful trade of 2 years' worth of goods, migrants are once again arriving at the fortress. Maybe not having alcohol makes dwarves less creative, because it was a long time before one of our dwarves felt inspired enough to craft us our first artifact. No major threats have wandered into the fortress yet. Well, besides the annoying ghost, buzzards, and the occasional dwarven tantrum. Soon enough, the more violent dwarves will need a place to cool down, so a prison is constructed. The fortress is doing great. There is a new mayor whose only flaw is demanding ballista parts all the time. The dwarves are making artifacts, constructing temples, and having some more tantrums. Sometimes you just need to lock those dwarves up for a bit. With things going so well for so long, I almost forgot that there are dangers in the world. A giant has appeared and was ready to smash any dwarf that got in its way. I needed to be very careful. This wasn't the greatest threat in the world, but still a dangerous enemy. Emergency barrows were assigned, and the military squads were stationed outside the entrance of the base to defend the less battle-ready dwarves. The giant began its approach. As the giant makes its way up the hill to the entrance of the base, the brave dwarves and loyal dogs swarmed the enormous monster. The fight did not last long. Miraculously, all of the dwarves and dogs made it out with no casualties. A lot of stuff had happened during the fight, and it was clear that the giant really never stood a chance. Although many dwarves fought, I need to know who struck that killing blow. After some investigation, I discovered the day's hero. It was a dog named Sarvish Ocean Gems. It was in the heat of this moment that the squads were mistakenly disbanded, and new ones needed to be formed. Some of the dwarves likely got to retire early from their military service. To commemorate the canine hero, Sarvish Ocean Gems, a platinum statue was crafted and erected in his honor. Now all the patrons of the dining hall will see and remember Sarvish's heroism. After the attack, the dwarves quickly fell back into their day-to-day routines. More items were crafted, more tunnels, ores, and gems were mined, and some acts of vandalism were committed. The dwarves were becoming exceedingly proficient at mining, so much so that they discovered a second caverns. The last time a cavern was discovered, our fisher dwarf died, and has haunted us ever since, so we approached this cavern with a bit more caution. A bridge was constructed to seal off the entrance. When the 7 dwarves arrived in this land, Tosid was the expedition leader. Since that time, he has become the mayor, the baron, and now the count. He is not currently happy with his rooms, and will need new ones created more fitting for a count. Count Tosid has been a great leader of the fortress. He has a lover, however, who has not been. She has been violent and has become a convicted criminal. Upon serving her sentence in the dungeon, she has gone berserk. She sadly must remain caged even though she claims that she is repentant. Preparations have been made for entering the new caverns, and they have been opened up for the community to explore, harvest, and hunt in. As the dwarves are hard at work expanding the guild hall for the growing farming guild, we are brought back to the event that started this video, an attack from below. The infiltrators had already stormed past the defensive bridge and were running up the stairs. The invaders were spotted, fearsome Ant-Man soldiers with their queens. Wielding blowguns, they sought to cause mayhem within the fortress and leave with spoils of war from within. Since the last attack on our fortress, the dwarves have been training hard for any future threats. 2 fully formed squads of military dwarves were dispatched to halt the progress of the approaching ant invasion. The ants are capable of opening unlocked doors, but their progress would be halted if they reached a door locked with a solid wood plank. Most of the dwarves were safely behind closed doors. Most of our military dwarves were already below, with a few straggling miners who were left outside of the locked doors. The fight was over surprisingly quickly. The ants clearly stood no chance against this group of dwarves who had been training for years in the art of warfare. Dead on the ground, the carnage spread across several floors. Among the dead were 2 queen ants who led the charge. When the fighting broke out, a craft store swiftly turned on the ants, smacking a blow dart out of the air with his pick. Then a miner took on both queen ants, dispatching them with precise hits of his pickaxe. The ant heads were no more of a challenge than the rocks he was mining just moments before. The mining dwarf Enod was the champion of the day. Like the heroes before him, he would have a statue erected in his honor. The entrance to the base from the caverns was retaken, and the dwarves were allowed to roam the fortress freely again. Upon completion of the statue of Enod, I learned something about his history. He was once sheriff and wept when being removed from his position. I regretted this slight against this dwarf, and a new militia captain position was created for him with a few military dwarves for him to supervise. What had started as a small group of dwarves creating a commune of sober residents had attracted over 100 more dwarven friends. Their prosperity led to the land becoming a metropolis, and the leader from the beginning, Tosid, has now become the duke of this group of dwarves. These dwarves had achieved something great. Sobriety is unheard of among dwarves. When left without alcohol, most would go insane. These dwarves, however, harnessed their frustrations into creating a safe haven for migrants and working on behalf of others in creating food, clothes, weapons, and artifacts. To commemorate the achievements of these dwarves, I had a monument constructed. A room set aside near the duke's quarters would house engraved copper floors with statues made in the image of a plump helmet, a dog, and the Duke Tosid. The final touch for the completed room being the most recent artifact created within the fortress, a copper spike. Not all stories in Dwarf Fortress need to have a violent and morbid ending. Although a pretty safe location was chosen for this embark, the dwarves had their own battles to fight, and they had prevailed. It was a fitting time to retire this fortress and end this story, for now.